Nearly half of the entire Bible is made up of stories. But for a long, long time, a lot of us have been reading them with kind of the wrong goal in mind. So in this explainer, we're going to totally transform how you read biblical stories, moving from just simple moral lessons to something way, way richer. Okay, let's get into it. So let's start with an absolute classic. When you think about the story of David and Goliath, what's the big takeaway for you? I'm willing to bet for most of us, it's pretty much the same thing. Yep, face your giants. Or maybe trust God and you can overcome any obstacle. Or go find your 5 smooth stones. This is the standard lesson we all learned in Sunday school. And listen, it's not wrong, but it's a little thin. Now here's the wild idea that changes absolutely everything. What if the main character in the story of David and Goliath isn't actually David? And what if the story isn't really about you and your giants? The moment we make ourselves the hero, we accidentally miss the actual hero of the entire story. So our first big move is finding the main character. And that means shifting our focus from me to God. See, from the time we're little kids, we're basically trained to read stories to find the moral, right? Like in Aesop's fables. But biblical stories are playing a different game. Their main purpose isn't to give us moral examples to copy. It's to reveal who God is and what he's up to in the world. So this is the crucial shift in perspective. It's everything. Before we jump to asking what a story means for us, we have to start by asking what it shows us about God. Honestly, this one single question is the key that unlocks a much deeper and way more accurate understanding of these stories. And to help you make this shift, we need a new reader's toolkit. So let's look at 3 key ideas that are going to equip you to read these ancient stories the way their authors actually wanted you to. Okay, first up, and this one is huge, we have to understand the difference between descriptive and prescriptive. A descriptive part of the text just describes what happened. It's like a news report. A prescriptive part, on the other hand, prescribes what we should do. It's more like a command. This is so important because not every single action you read about in a Bible story is an example to follow. The Bible is super honest about the flaws and failures of its characters. It reports on them, but it doesn't always endorse them. Second, we need to learn how to spot the literary techniques the authors are using. Just think of these as road signs pointing you toward the main idea. So when a word gets repeated over and over, the author's waving a big flag saying, pay attention to this. When characters speak, those words were chosen so carefully. When 2 things are contrasted, it's to make a point. And even the way the story is structured tells you what the author thinks is the most important part. Okay, theory is great, but let's put this new toolkit to work. We're going to take a quick look at 3 really famous stories and see how asking our new questions completely changes the whole picture. Let's start with the really intense story of Abraham and Isaac. God tests Abraham, telling him to sacrifice his son, the son he waited a lifetime for. But notice the repetition in God's command. He doesn't just say, take your son. He says, your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love. The author really wants you to feel the gut-wrenching weight of this moment. Now, the common moral we usually pull from this is all about Abraham's incredible faith. Trust God even when it feels impossible. And look, that's absolutely true, but it's not the main point of the story. The real climax of the story isn't just that Isaac is saved, but that God himself provides a ram to take his place, a substitute. Abraham even names the place, the Lord will provide. The whole story is a massive signpost pointing to God's character as a provider, and it's this incredible foreshadowing of the ultimate substitute he would one day provide in his own son. Okay, next up, Gideon. When we first meet this guy, he is literally hiding from his enemies in a wine press, trying not to be seen. And this is how the angel of the Lord greets him. Can you feel the irony here? Mighty man of valor. At this moment, Gideon is the exact opposite of that. Now, so many of us read this story and think the lesson is that when we're feeling unsure, we should put out a fleece and ask God for a special sign. But this is a classic mix-up of descriptive and prescriptive. The text is describing Gideon's weak faith, which God is gracious enough to work with. It's not prescribing it as a model for how we should act. So Gideon starts out with a pretty decent-sized army, 32,000 men. He was probably feeling okay about his chances with those numbers. But of course, God has a very different plan. God then systematically whittles that army all the way down to just 300 soldiers. Why on earth would he do that? Well, he tells us exactly why. So that Israel couldn't boast and say, my own hand has saved me. This contrast right here is the whole point of the story. So the real theological point isn't a how-to guide for making decisions. It's that God intentionally works through our weakness, through our inadequacy, so that when the victory comes, there is zero doubt about who gets the credit. His power is made perfect in our weakness. For our last example, let's jump over to the New Testament, to the picture of the very first church in Jerusalem, right after Pentecost. Luke paints this absolutely beautiful picture of radical community and incredible generosity. Now, some people read this and conclude that it's a prescriptive model, that this is a command for every church in every time and every place to follow this exact same practice of owning everything together. But a much better reading sees this as a description of what the Holy Spirit produced in one specific, amazing historical moment. The deeper prescriptive principle, the part for us, is that the Spirit creates genuine, generous community. The specific form that generosity takes can and does look different, as we see in other parts of the New Testament. The principle is timeless, but the specific practice was historical. So, how do we make all this practical? Let's boil everything we've talked about down into a simple, repeatable habit you can use every single time you open up the Bible to a story. Here they are. 3 questions for every story. First, and always start here. What does this story show me about God's character, His plan, His values? Second, ask that crucial question. Is this action just being described, or is it being prescribed as a model for me to follow? And third, look for the author's clues. Where do you see repetition, dialogue, contrast, or the plot structure guiding you to the main point? When you start asking these questions, the Bible's stories just open up in a whole new way. They stop being simple fables about us and what we should do, and they become these rich, complex, and true stories about the God who is rescuing and redeeming the world. So with this new toolkit in your hands, what's a familiar story that you're going to go back and read with fresh eyes?